Everyone who is here live and also hopefully joining later if we can post this. This session today is on, just seeing a comment in the chat. This session is on developing society culture, particularly around some of the challenges that COVID has presented and the online era. We have, I think it's B, is that how, do you pronounce it B? Daniel. You can introduce yourselves later, Grace and Jack. So I will start by just asking everyone to just introduce themselves and just tell everyone a little bit about yourselves, your sort of experience on whether it be society execs or some of your debating achievements. Feel free to not be modest at all. I might start with Daniel and Grace.
Kia ora. So Grace and I live together, so that made this Zoom call exceptionally easy. I, for my whole career, have been with the University of Auckland Debating Society, and Grace is a recent mover to Auckland Debating Society. So two slightly different perspectives here. I've done lots of debating. I'm very old. I've very recently graduated, so I'm looking forward to a glorious post-debating career. And last year, I was the development officer at the Auckland Debating Society and helped run events like the Auckland Rumble, which are broad events that are designed to get people involved and to help people improve their debating. I also recorded a lot of debating videos through our development program, so those are all online if people want to have a look.
Yes, I was at Otago, which is one of the other New Zealand universities that does debating for 4 years, and then I've shifted up to Auckland. I'm going to do 9 years uni total. I never want to leave, and I've got therefore many years of debating ahead of me still, despite having many years of debating behind me. And I was the equity officer and then the vice president at Otago, and thus far I haven't contributed to Auckland in any meaningful way really, because I'm taking some time to be lazy.
Oh, awesome. All right, thanks both. Now I might go over to Bea B. Sorry, please introduce yourselves and tell us a bit about your background.
So yeah, you can call me B or Bea, either way is fine. I'm a second-year student at UP Diliman, or the University of the Philippines, and currently I'm the executive officer for public relations. A lot of my speaking career actually happened during the COVID pandemic, so I've been debating a lot recently, and I'm also looking forward to debating more, hopefully in person and seeing more people outside of just Zoom. Outside of speaking, I've also been involved as a creative specialist and as a trainer as well in debating academies in Singapore and Shanghai. So yeah, excited to.
Awesome, thanks for that. And finally, Jack.
Hey, I'm Jack. I'm third year at Trinity College Dublin. I started debating when I came to university, and I'm currently in third year. But my role currently in the HIST is, we call it debates convener, which makes no sense to anyone outside of the HIST. But what that entails is its development. So, i.e., like training of first years, also registering and deciding who goes to competitions, and thirdly, convening whatever annual competitions each year. And yeah, it's fun, but there's also me and like 3 other people in my department, so that seems like a lot, but so it's not just me. But yeah, that is all. I'm looking forward to this.
Well, the reason I asked all of you is because I think your societies, I mean, at least me, stand out as societies that have done awesome, in terms of retention online. I mean, it maybe, I don't know if that is empirically the case, but at least the perception is that like those debating societies are active, there's lots of members, they're engaged at competitions. So whatever you're doing, in your respective roles, whether it be executive roles or just kind of informally, seems to be working. So be interested in unpacking that a little bit more. So for this first question, I might start in the same order that we did the introductions in, and then we'll switch it around and mix it up a little bit. I kind of want to talk about, I guess, pre-COVID a little bit. Before COVID, what were, I guess, some of the kind of, and some of you may not be able to answer this as much because your experiences are more online based, and that's totally fine. And then feel free to kind of, we can talk about that a little bit more later. But what were some of the kind of the core basics that your society did, or at least you understand they did, before, you know, all of this happened. You know, was it a very social society? What sort of recruitment strategies were utilized? Those sorts of things. So I'll start with Dan and Grace.
So I just want to premise this that being in New Zealand is a little bit of a cheat code. Obviously, during COVID, for a lot of the year, we weren't actually in lockdown. So in many ways, a lot of what we did in person has carried on in terms of events that we can do with specific people. Though of course, there have been some like weird variations. So for example, we sent a huge squad to Australs, and we all just went to university every day and stayed there like outrageously late. But it was part of like an in-person online experience. So really engaging with the online world, even though we had a lot of our in-person events able to run ordinarily. So what we do is obviously we have recruiting early within the year where we try and get new first years. And because New Zealand is a relatively small space with relatively few number of schools, we also have some degree of knowledge about kids who are coming through, who can liaise with them basically as they come through from like schools nationals or school regionals into the different debating campuses. So you have recruiting at the beginning of the year, and we also ran quite a few events designed at essentially broadening our reach towards groups of people who we think might be interested within debating, but would never be convinced to come to a debating seminar. So I ran the first year law program, law tutorials that have like hundreds of kids come to them. It's quite a good way to increase people's knowledge of debating. And then in particular, a strategy we've used in the past that we really want to expand on is having specific outreach to groups or organizations that want to increase their members' public speaking skills and maybe underrepresented. So that's things like the Māori Law Society at the University of Auckland, a group of people who are very, very smart and very eloquent, but may not be represented well within debating. And then groups like Engineering Society or the Science Society, the Art Society, building relationships with different organizations in order to try and get them in and then retain them. And we run with the structure of having development seminars separate to our club nights. So we have people come along and debate and then have a range of ways in which they can increase their development in a slightly less formal, only debating type instance. So for example, the seminars that have been published online or having more engaged workshops. So that's really how Auckland ran things.
Daniel has a different perspective to me because he's been on the Auckland exec through COVID, whereas I was on the exec at Otago, and last year came up during COVID for my first year at Auckland. I started a new degree. And so I was kind of like very much an insider in New Zealand debating, but kind of an outsider at Auckland DevSoc. And besides what Daniel has said, Auckland has done a really good job of building a sense of online community. There's really active group chats. There's still active chats from Australs, from our New Zealand majors. People post really random, conversation starters in there. And it's kind of been a good way to kind of get to know and feel like part of the community, which has been really good for me because although I know a lot of the older debaters, I don't really feel like I'm part of, I didn't previously know a lot of the like broader parts of the Auckland DevSoc before. So just simple things like having group chats that exec members and like regular society members feel comfortable using has meant that I feel like I've got to know people really well.
Yeah, the Australs 2019 group chat gets a message every time the Sudanese flag makes it into the news. So having those types of like lineage and being able to bring people back into the feeling of what it's like to have those tournaments. One thing I'll also add, is we run both in the North Island and the South Island, and we've been to development tournaments all across New Zealand, Grace and I, but there are two huge ones, one down in the South Island, one up in the North Island, that basically hundreds of first years will go to. And that event, I think, is particularly good for building a community amongst first years, so they don't feel like a couple of chosen ones who are being introduced into the society, and they don't feel completely alone either. It's a way for them to build friendships and build a group with whom they can travel through essentially their debating careers with. So running specific programs for first years where they can meet other first years, they can do stuff together. People who are on the periphery are like, oh, I'm not really that keen on debating, but I'd like a fun weekend with friends, can be included within that experience and brought on board, I think is quite important. So the one in the South Island is actually excellent. They go to a campsite that is far away from anything, and they all sleep in these dorm rooms, where in the North Island, we go to two smaller cities that exist in New Zealand. So you have a trip, everyone gets to go together, and that's quite like a fun experience for the first years, and I think actually has a really important role in making sure that they're retained. And also for like slightly older people, that's how we teach them how to judge as well. So a lot of our first and our second and third years who won't be speaking yet, but in New Zealand won't be accredited, which is essentially a program that we do across New Zealand debating, where you have to be trained as a judge and assessed as a judge before you're allowed to judge any of our majors. So you literally are unable to judge a major if you haven't gone through the specific process. That's a way for them to stay involved within that junior tournament, even though they have aged out of speaking at it. So they'll come back, they'll trainee, and they'll experience what it's like to judge and have quite a lot of feedback from the older judges who come along.
Awesome, thanks for that. I think that's a pretty comprehensive set of things that both of those societies are doing, and I certainly have also, a few Sudanese flag throwbacks as well there. So awesome. The next, were you, I guess, how much experience did you have with in-person debating before the online era? And is there anything that I guess sticks out to you as kind of like core kind of societal practices?
So I was a high school debater in the Philippines, so I kind of understood offline debating. But in the university, like for all organizations, even outside of debate, the culture is there's something called an application process. So a lot of orgs often take half a semester before you become an official member. And for the debate society, it took me around, so I had like a month or so to myself as a first year, and then after that we had 2 months of the application process. After, thankfully, I passed the application process, it went straight to nationals. So my actual offline university debate experience was just like 1 month where we went to nationals. So I had as much experience with our org culture prior to COVID. But I do recall one of the fun things that we had prior to COVID was, so even if you weren't a high school debater, you'd get paired with a family, 4th years or graduates, as well as alumni. They'd give us help in terms of case building. It's really quite fun because even if you're not super confident in your skills, like you weren't super a national champion in high school or something, you still have people who get you inculcated in the culture and understand the differences between university debating. I think the fun thing as well is, aside from buddies, you also have people being acclimated to debate. So you don't go into full rounds as a first year. You get some exercise beforehand. So you kind of get to understand, oh, this is the rule first. So as an ESL speaker, it also helps us a lot because it gets us to know or to understand how to prep first, how to get game. And I think that's the fun part, like being able to make debate less of a sport and also I think that's what I experienced within the 2 months I had of the application process as well as in training. Yeah, I think the most fun I had though socials, because for our institution, it's not like we have access to a lot of majors out of the Philippines. So usually what we looked forward to was really nationals, and perhaps occasionally we'd go to Asian championships, so you don't really have big majors like Worlds or Australs that was super accessible to us. So at that point, I think what really got people to stay in debate was the culture of socials, going to the pubs around. They helped us.
Awesome, thanks for that. I think that your internet was a little bit patchy at times, but I think I kind of got the gist. So thank you for that. But I also believe Daniel has a question for you now that he wants to ask.
Yeah, sorry. So one of the things that we think about a lot in New Zealand is the balance between basically it being a very intense process, especially for kids who want a lot of advanced training, really want to throw themselves in, but not making it exclusive to that group, and also making sure that people who potentially don't want to commit as much as we do are able to keep involved. What has made, do you think, the process that you were describing basically not too overwhelming for you, or not too overwhelming from someone else who maybe wouldn't have high school experience? And do you think there are things that are done well or could be done better in that circumstance? Because we are really balancing out how intense we make that early phase as well.
Yeah, I think firstly what helps is really exercises and just showing them how to case build first. Like instead of giving them a full round, treating them as though how you would treat high school novs, like giving them this house would ban prostitution or those really like small motions so that they can get used to how to think first. And like not putting them into a 7 minute speech, but like asking them to do a 3 minute speech or try to give an argument or try to think of it. And I think a lot of the time it helps them as well to have a buddy or to have someone who is an upper year to help them generate some ideas. I think oftentimes it is kind of hard to start like jumping into it competitively. So what we approach is usually just a public speaking approach first. And then once after a month or so or after 2 weeks or so of getting used to it, we put them all in the room, put them all in a round, and we try as much as possible to not be super harsh with the feedback. So like just limiting ourselves to 3 general pieces of feedback. And often we also try to process around with them. And it's definitely a 2 month journey with them. So even me with some of my noms who I also see in the call. So we're always just trying to help each other out and we're always trying to give them as much resources as possible. I think the great thing too is even when it's a particularly stressful round, and I guess this is the second thing, like inevitably they're going to have to encounter the harshness of debating. The fun thing is just now that you have a friendship that's formed with them and it's kind of like a support system, there's the feedback mechanism where you can ask them how they are doing and you can always ask them something. In the Philippines, there's something called a kumustahan, which is kind of just you sit down with them and you kind of talk to them. And I think that's one of the important things that we try to have, that you have a relationship with someone who's older than you and can also assist you as well as other people who are applying with you. Yeah.
Awesome. That's really cool. Thank you for that. I might go to Jack now. Well, you're a third year, so you've probably got some experience with what things were like before online. So tell us about it.
Yeah, I'd like to preface this with our society takes in about 1,100 new members each year, and those memberships are for 4 years. So it's about 4,400 members at any given time. But not all of those people are that actively involved. The reason a lot of people tend to sign up during our Freshers Week is because we do things like we have puppy rooms where we have like a dog charity come in with some puppies, and then we raise money for that, and people want to go to those events. And we also tend to try get like guests, etc. during the 4 years, so people often sign up so that they can see those guests. But in terms of just like getting people involved and making sure that you can catch their attention, the types of things we did was we always send out a weekly email, so that would give an email to people who were passively involved in the society or actively involved in society, telling them all of the things that we would be doing that week so that they would see it. Other things would be things that we would do novice training once a week. So often we would typically we would do it on Monday evenings after lectures so that people could often get involved, and that would often just be a good ratio of like, when I say good ratio, I think often what we noticed even offline and online, that it's good to have not that big of a ratio. Like you'd want to have more people who are in first year than more people who are like older members of the society, because in a lot of ways it just means that they can talk to other people in their own year group, and it just helps foster that. And then when you need older people to be there as it progresses, etc., then ask them to come. But I think that's often as a starting point, and as it progresses, important to have. We also do things like it's like house debates that would often happen once a week, and often what would happen after that is that we would have things like wine afterwards, or just people and like have some food, and people would hang out and relax. And then we'd often do other miscellaneous events, potentially such as things like tea and toast on a like a Thursday morning, where people could just come and just hang out on our campus, like on our place on campus, and just chill out and hang out. And it's just like a lot of those types of things would just mean that people, whether they came for debating and then found debating, or just came to for the social aspect and then found debating, I think that it gave like two distinct pathways in which people could continue to be actively involved in debating, because I think in a way it solves, not solves, but I think it's like the balance that was spoken about previously, where I think it's you can get super actively involved, or you can just be in the society for the social aspect, and you're not pressured either way, and you kind of have the capacity to make the society what you want to make it. I think that's, I mean, it means it's less pressure, and I think that's how it was pre-COVID. And yeah.
Sorry, Jack, just to jump in there. I have a thought/question for you and B. When I ran our first development seminar, and often in your first event, you'll have a lot of people come who may not be intending to come to any other things. Obviously, the ideal is to have like a good ratio where you have a bunch of older people who can chat with younger people, but sometimes the numbers are just overwhelming. And as you say, like 4,000 can be a bit overwhelming. Auckland also has huge number of new members who come in. So obviously that first seminar will be up to like 100 people. And what I ended up having to do, and I think so this is the way that we dealt with just that overwhelming number of people in that seminar. I want to hear about the ways that you also dealt with it, is splitting the room up into 4 areas. And then basically having a BP debate between these groups of about 20 people that you split into smaller groups to brainstorm ideas, to teach them the basics and mechanics of BP. But when you have that huge number of people, you end up having to adopt these types of agglomeration strategies in order to just like boil it down to something that's meaningful and they can learn something. How does your society deal with what must be just an overwhelming number of people who pile in at that first few seminars?
So it tends on average, so dual institutionality in Ireland, that's a separate discussion. But so I think both societies think I get about an average of like 60 people going to the very first seminar, and we're kind of lucky in that we have our own debating like building effectively, which means that we have a lot of rooms. I think we have like about 10 rooms that can be used for debating. And we also, in a lot, our committee is quite big, so our committee is about 24 people, which means that in a lot of ways, and they wouldn't all be actively involved in debating. I think that at any given time, maybe there's like 6 to 8 older people who still are actively involved in speaking. But I think they're the type of people who are kind of got involved. So often you can make it so that you can at least get it down to an 8-to-1 ratio or a 4-to-1 ratio, and just go through the basics with them. And often, what at least I've noticed in previous years is that you can have those people meet up, not the first years, but the older, more experienced people, and just have a conversation about how you want the first seminar to go, and then just to have a conversation around it. Often, what we did was, um, especially in Freshers Week, because the first seminar was the week after Freshers Week, was in like the first training session, but the first like time that people showed up, like trying events, we'd have like 30 people show up. And what we do is we get them all to stand in a line in a room, like one people on one side, other people on another side, and we'd be like, okay, discuss the death penalty. Left side's prop up, the right side's up, and think about it for a minute, then talk to the person in front of you, and then we'd rotate and we'd just do things like that, and then we'd explain to them what they were doing and things like that. So I think that's we're lucky in one way, but also I think that's possibly a solution in another way as to how to do that.
Awesome. Thanks for that, guys. So I think that gives us a good starting point to sort of delve into some further things and now kind of look at what the last year has kind of meant for societies. And I might stay on with you, Jack, and then go back in reverse order. And yeah, if people have, if panelists have questions for other panelists, jump in. But yeah, online is obviously a challenge. A lot of what you've described, is not necessarily all in person, like you talked about the mail outs and stuff like that, but obviously a huge part of the culture did, sounds like have an element of in person. So I guess how have you guys gone about that? What I really like about your society and what I've only noticed in the last week since I guess knowing you guys a little bit better is like how much there's like support and tagging everyone after every tournament and shouting out for people's achievements. I think that's a really cool part of it, but I'll let you over to you to expand, I guess.
So we have not been as I don't know, as smart as New Zealand, let's say, but we've been in total lockdown pretty much for the most of the time, with exceptions here and there. In the academic year, we've not been able to host any in-person events. A couple of things that we do. Firstly, after each tournament, because I know there's a lot now, like pretty much people go to one every week, is that we post like how everyone got on at each competition as like a congratulations. I think I've seen a tenure do this too, when I see people get tagged and stuff, which I think is a pretty cool thing. And then additionally, what we do is, so obviously novice training, occurs in a similar way that it did pre-COVID, but we have breakout rooms instead of actual rooms, and we have people getting involved. And I think the unique selling point has been that in a lot of societies on Trinity at least, it's been incredibly difficult for it to be interactive. So often they will go to events and they'll just be committee members talking to each other, and it's hard to make them help break that barrier. So I think in a lot of instances, people just felt like the other societies weren't that interactive. They've already spent like, I don't know, like 5 or 6 hours in a day watching Zoom lectures. And I think Zoom fatigue really does kick in, and they don't want to just sit there and listen to other people talk. So I think when they come to novice training, we would often pair them up with people, or we'd even talk to them, but also make sure to get their views at the start was definitely interactive. And then as it progressed, we paired them up, we would do drills and exercises, and then give them feedback and things like that. And then additionally, after training, we'd always try to do things like play Among Us or play games. And then additionally on top of that, we would have a Discord server, not just for the novices, but I think even there's a Discord server run by one of our friends. I'm not going to say the name of it since this is being recorded. But like we were just supposed to serve, like if anyone wants to ever pop on, then they can. So we just pop we'd have a novice group chat where people can talk freely, as I think you've flagged before in Auckland. But we would just post in there and be like, if anyone wants to join. And then on Discord, we'd be like, add everyone. We're playing Among Us. We're doing X. And a lot of like the first years would just hop on and just play with us. And I think over the last couple of months, it's meant that a lot of them just enjoyed the experience. They all come back, and I think that has meant that they are actively being involved and enjoying it more, from even getting like anonymous feedback from them, because I think that's important. And they seem to overwhelmingly have enjoyed it. I think an additional thing that we've done is that we have reached out to another Dublin society called UCD, and we do joint novice training with them. So I think on top of that, I think it has meant that people can then make friends with people in their year, but in different universities, that maybe they would have met on nights out or at debating competitions, but can't as easily, because everything's like big stack tournaments to a large extent. So it just means that there's like this gateway for them to make friends. And I think we started that like 3 weeks ago, and things like that. And that seems to be going well. I think other events that I was talking about in terms of like the house debates have really suffered because there's no like social aspect, like having a wine or anything afterwards. And also that isn't like really in my remit as much. Like I was like a normal committee member last year, but now I'm like in charge of a department, and I'm quite busy, so I just focus on that one. But there's like, yeah, there's been like, I would say, higher engagement this year from novices than in other years, which seems counterintuitive, but it's
Yeah, well, that's pretty cool. And yeah, as I said, it's definitely noticeable that you guys have a big amount of online engagement and activity. So that's really cool. What about you, because I mean, my observation is that in general, the Philippine circuit has kind of just like, I don't know, maybe people just weren't noticing the Philippine circuit before, but it just seems like it has exploded in the last year. And I'm not sure if that's correct or not. But I see people from your debating society at like a whole bunch of tournaments in multiple circuits. So I'm curious to know what you guys are doing.
Yeah, I think definitely for a lot of circuits, or sorry, rather a lot of institutions outside of our institution. Prior to COVID, we don't really have a lot of institutional support. Talking about my institution, we didn't have a room at all. So we debated on the floor of the school. I know other institutions, they also don't have rooms, so they get kicked out when it's a specific time. And our friends from other institutions, they have to stay outside the university to be able to train. So what helped a lot in COVID is, which is kind of counterintuitive as well, since COVID shouldn't help. But everything now is on Zoom and on Discord. So the absence of physical rooms is solved by being able to have Zoom rooms instead, and being able to have Discord rooms where you can actually not worry about flies getting to you while you're prepping, or not worry about like being hunched over and having back problems because of it, because you're always on the floor. So it definitely helped a lot in terms of training. I think the Philippines also didn't super deal with COVID a bit well, as you would probably know in IR and econ debates. But starting with COVID, what I think our institution did pretty well is they took time first to assess how everyone was doing economically as well as physically. So with some leftover funds, I think what was great was that they asked us how they could assist us academically in terms of giving out data packs as well as like routers that they can help fund. On a physical level, our VPs in the institution, as I mentioned earlier, have things like kumustahans, which is basically the Filipino word for checking up on people. So we had individual committees where people ask you, how's your relationship with debate? Are you interested in competing even now, since you're probably handling other academics as well as economic problems? How can we best serve you? And I think that really helped a lot, because aside from building a support system, it also helped the organization know where we are and how people are feeling. And I think the results of that were that a lot of people felt burnt out, or they weren't sure that online debating was for them, because granted, at the start of everything was just online. It was kind of a mess. So I think what helped as well was we had these sessions that's still continuing until now, things like debate therapy, where if you feel kind of burnt out, they put you in with the training vice president and the educational affairs vice president and the welfare like vice president, and you get to talk to your feelings. It's definitely not certified, but it's great to be able to rant and to be able to talk about, oh my god, my extension got stolen, or oh my god, I don't know how I feel about this particular tournament. So it really helps a lot to have a catharsis that other people know where you're coming from, and it's just great as well to know that you're not alone, even if you're just in your room shouting about, I don't know, Robin Hood or something. I think what helped as well is we had a de-rusting season at the start of the semester. So I think what I noticed is that a lot of people feel like online debating is a bit scarier because, while it's more accessible, you're also going against a lot of really good people like Jack and, DMG and Jess and Grace in different tournaments. So the more that it gets scarier, I think people kind of feel like online debating is not for them. So what we tried to do is we had a de-rusting season. So it was definitely prompted by a lot of the pop culture tournaments that we had recently. So people would debate about Harry Potter, and that would get them back into online debating because they'd get used to how to prep with Google Docs or how to prep with like Overcall or something like that. So they don't feel it's that scary anymore. At least that one barrier is less. So I think that's one good thing that we had in terms of burnouts. I'd also agree with Jack. I think we have some cheering posts. Now that everything is weekly, it's fun that in our Facebook groups, like they get tagged, okay, like this person is going to this IV, this person is going to this Open. And it's just nice to see as well, alumni get to spend more time to help us out, because now that it's not necessarily physical, they can hop on a Zoom call after their work and try to train with us, as well as on the other hand, the knobs as well are able to, like, since everything is asynchronous, knobs can also do more rounds and they can get to hang out with us without having to walk across like the university or without having to go home early. So I think that's really helpful as well. Very similar to what Jack said, like more people becoming more intrinsically motivated. And I think the last thing is just, now that there are a lot more tournaments, before in the Philippines, I think you'd get less than 10 IVs if you were lucky, as like including nationals already. Now that you have everything that's online, like weekly, you have something to train for. And before, when you didn't have something to train for, people didn't really go to training. So now that you're always thinking, okay, I have a tournament this weekend, I have a tournament next weekend, people are motivated to train, people are motivated to get better. So I think that also makes the society a lot more active and a lot more engaged. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for that. That's all really, really useful, I think. And I think good to sort of, again, hear lessons from different circuits. Daniel and Grace, what about the both of you? Who wants to start? I guess, I mean, it's trickier for you because, as you said, like, you haven't had the same, I guess, constraints that other countries have had with online, but you still obviously had to navigate a different structure, online Australs, those sorts of things. And obviously some periods of being in lockdown, even though they've been much smaller than most other countries. So do you feel like much has changed, or?
I think that New Zealanders, I don't know if anyone in the world was really doing online debating beforehand, but I think it's definitely encouraged a lot of societies to use the internet more innovative ways. Like we have had some lockdowns, so I think there's been a lot of societies using online selectors for, like, say, trials for tournaments more than they would have before, being more confident getting a judge in to judge something like digitally, kind of, and things that take less commitment. So like I know, like talking about alumni and older members, it's a lot easier for alumni to come in and do, like, say, one debate after work, like you said. I think Bea, you said it, versus having to fly down to another city and help out your society for a whole weekend, which is what New Zealand often asked of its alumni in the past, which is obviously
New Zealand's very big as well.
cost and time difficult. So I think that it's prompted more use of tools, which I think will be helpful going forward. I think the one, but I do think that our COVID success has hurt our online debating engagement a little bit, because I have got the vibe just from, like, Facebook groups that a lot of the world is doing a lot of online debating. Unfortunately for New Zealanders, that is actually the online debating weekends are competing with actual music festivals and actual concerts and, like, holidays around the country with friends. So it's been maybe harder for us to,
motivate people.
People have had other options to spend their time with, equally fun times with friends. So I think that while a small number of New Zealanders have done, like, lots of online debating, I think a lot of people haven't done as much as the rest of the world. So we've probably missed out a little bit on some of our, some learning we could have done. So we're going to be a weaker cohort the next international tournaments.
So I think a couple of things have changed for me. I think the first is that even within New Zealand, there's a lot more training before tournaments across campuses. So when I was younger in debating, very much I would train just with my society. Now when I'm training for a tournament, I'll debate against people from Otago, I'll debate more against people from Canterbury, debate against people from Victoria. So there's a lot more, because New Zealand's always been quite a close circuit. You become very, very good friends with people who live in other campuses, because there's only like 4 major campuses within New Zealand. And now you're just allowed to train with them far more easily. And that was a tool that always existed, but we've never particularly used strongly or in as consistent a way as before. The second thing I'd say is I think it exposes New Zealand to international judging a lot more, both in that I, for example, would never have judged at ABP had it not been for the fact that I was able to access it online. New Zealand is very, very far away from where most of these tournaments are held. So it's been like extraordinary to be able to get that opportunity. And if you look at just how well a lot of our judges did it, say, for example, Australs, I think that was testament to the fact that we got to send so many good people to go and judge these tournaments. We were able to take what I think is quite a unique judging culture in New Zealand and make sure that it was tested and strengthened by exposure to the international circuit. So I think that type of stuff pays off. And if there's any New Zealanders watching, go and judge overseas. I think it's quite like a valuable experience as well. And then I think the last thing that it has done, in addition to allowing us to really train with other people and exposing us to other judges, is it has actually changed the social environment a little bit. So when Auckland moved its club nights online, we actually did have people from other campuses, in fact, outside of New Zealand, start coming along to our events. We've been able to push out a lot more content online than we were otherwise doing. So obviously during our first lockdown, which was like a 6-7 week lockdown, so it was a sizable chunk of our first semester, able to push out a lot of content over that time and have stuff like Noise from the Bench, which was just Grace, Joe, and I sitting on this exact couch, randomly chatting about debating culture and having people call in. Those types of cool, innovative things force you to switch up the way that you engage with people. And what I really hope happens to New Zealand, and in fact, it's debating worldwide, is this shocks us out of traditional ways of doing things in a way that then means you reevaluate what works and what doesn't work. Some stuff hasn't worked for a while. It's really good that we've been able to shift it up. Getting selectors from outside of your society, I think, is incredibly healthy, because it means your culture doesn't become insular. It means your way of debating doesn't become insular. And some stuff will hopefully return to the normal. Seeing people in person, it slaps. It's awesome. It's great. So it's really nice to be able to have that vibe going. So finding that balance is going to be interesting. Online Scriblio, just an exceptional game. If anyone is looking for a game to play with, especially a smaller group of people up to 10, Scriblio is best. It is spelled SKRIBBLO, and please use my promo code. They've paid me so much money to advertise their service.
I really like Among Us. I love the little, I've played it once recently, and it's got these little people. I think those are very cute.
Yeah, little people are cute.
I get realized it says boomy energy of me.
Grace really likes minions. Just gonna put
That's not true. That's slander.
Maybe you guys could foster like a Trinity and Auckland, like cross among us, something or other.
Time zone.
Yeah, the time zones suck. All right, well, that's actually a really good segue into the next question. And for this one, I might go you guys, Jack, B at the end, yeah, basically like whatever this post-COVID world looks like, as you said, we should be learning, like we should kind of not just go back to how things were. We should obviously take, you know, from the online era, if we're going to call it that, the things that worked. Can you expand upon anything that you think, I guess, should be kept, should not be kept? Something that I think I'd be interested for you guys to talk about a little bit more, perhaps, would be the hybrid tournament approach, which is something that I think a lot of people would be interested in hearing. But yeah, anything. So you talked about selectors. Yeah. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah, like just using resources that are ostensibly like zooming in selectors rather than paying for them to fly. New Zealand societies are generally quite budget limited. I think hybrid, I've seen that work really well. I think that's a really good model, like Daniel says, just to bring in those debaters from other circuits and judges from other circuits who kind of, you know, broaden one's mind a little bit. I think that's really good. I think probably, I hope that the exec members that have learnt the skills of building a community in the absence of in-person community building, even New Zealand, like the group chats I was talking about and like, you know, the little online games, hope that the people retain those skills and keep using them, because obviously that could be additional to traditional in-person stuff rather than just a substitute. So I hope that some of that skill kind of remains for another year and gets embedded in like regular management of the society. I'd be really interested to see, like, in terms of tournament planning, I think that I don't know how other circuits have felt, like from New Zealand perspective, like, you know, Worlds has been kind of canned and then been mid-year, which clashes for Australs. I don't think there's a lot of kind of wriggle room or contingency plans built into how we currently run tournaments, and hopefully we won't have to worry about this again, but I'd be interested to see how that changes sometimes, how we approach tournament planning. I'm not sure how I think it would change it, but I think that it's something to think about, that we weren't really prepared for the impact of losing like multiple Australs in a row and how that affects your ability of your circuit to grow and develop.
Yeah, like New Zealand had rolling lockdowns throughout the year, and so we ended up having to move both of our major tournaments like towards the end of the year, much later than they'd ordinarily be, and that did throw off, I think, just to some degree, the ordinary rhythm that you have of doing things. So I think online debating has the potential to be like revolutionary good for access, but also has a possibility of actually making a far more closed off world where like elite societies essentially just debate against other elite societies, and then lock out another group of people who maybe don't have access to those same groups. And I think what Grace was saying about hybrid is also probably something that will have to be increasingly grappled with. I think it's quite a difficult ask, especially for countries that have much lower purchasing powers, that they travel tens of thousands of kilometers away so that people don't have to use a laptop while they debate, when hybrid can make obviously a format like Worlds hundreds of times more accessible or affordable for those groups, but nonetheless recognizing that they have costs and making sure that you keep engagement with the community. And also, if you look at the rise of things like round robins, where HWS has obviously been around for a while, but there's been a real explosion of round robins, making sure that doesn't come at the cost of having large inclusive majors that seek to bring people into the fold, will be like I think a difficult balance for the world and for New Zealand. So making sure you keep that balance between making sure your circuits are strong and not just jumping out of those circuits, while making sure that you also are able to reap the benefits of international friendships, which has been like an incredibly meaningful part, I think, of most people's who've done international debating, that their overall career is going to be quite difficult. And also, I'm really interested to see whether national styles of debating persist in a world of online debating. I think we should aggressively resist the homogenization of like global debating, the choosing of specific styles that are the dominant styles. And of course, if you go to Worlds, there's always been biases and double standards that are rightfully being exposed. But we should have a conversation, I think, as a broader community about what it means to judge constantly across very different contexts, and figure out ways to make sure that the individual things that make societies, circuits like quite wonderful, make sure that those don't die out in a world where everyone is just constantly smashing against each other and ground to a fine, very homogeneous paste.
Very well put. Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of that. And I think, I mean, I don't, my kind of personal opinion is just like, it'd be cool to have like a 50-50 split of like online and in person going forward, or like maybe 60-40 or something like that in favor of in person. But I mean, I really like the fact that online I can just like debate with people that I would have never otherwise gotten the opportunity to debate with. And that's kind of cool. So, but anyway, what are your reflections, Jack, building on what Grace and Dan have said?
Yeah, I largely agree. Like, I think hybrid is probably the way to go forward. I think in terms of like just making sure that people can enjoy it on like a national level, I think it's fine to say like have one like national comp a month or something, or every 6 weeks, and then have like access to other online ones as it goes. Because I think Daniel, at least in the European circuit, thankfully that not doomsday scenario, but that scenario of the elite societies locking people out hasn't come to fruition, or it hasn't even trended towards that. Because European comps have just become death blenders where everyone goes every weekend, and I don't know, like Warwick IV is typically not that difficult of a competition, but it was so stacked this year. And like every competition, it seemingly just has everyone comes. It's hyper competitive and it's fun and it's go whoosh, and everyone does. But also the flip side of that also is that there are smaller competitions as well. Like for example, I think Aberdeen and Exeter, in Europe at least, were run this weekend gone, and they were not as hyper competitive or as big. So I also think that it's nice to have that balance, or not even the balance, but the options for individuals to make that choice as well, which has been nice. I don't know how that applies to other circuits, etc., because I think in a lot of ways the European circuit has been quite lucky that it seemingly fits in the middle for about a lot of the Asian circuit and a lot of the American circuit to converge on European competitions, which is why I tend to see a lot of institutions from either continent, which has been also quite nice and quite fun. Just because I also think that what often happens is if you can, so in the scenario that you even are able to go to Worlds, often you just don't be able to debate against other like debating societies from different continents. I think that just means that it's not as fun, or you're just not as well equipped when you do get to go to Worlds, for example. And I think that things like that are also offset. But yeah, they're my 2 cents.
Awesome, thanks for that. And finally, because I feel like my impression is that large parts of the Southeast Asian circuit are very sort of pro keeping things as online as they can. Is that is my assumption correct, or is there what's the feeling kind of there, and what are your reflections?
Yeah, I think as well the opinion I have is more towards online, but that's because my concern with hybrid, and I think the others can feel free to like answer after. My concern with online is particularly to our university. I think that would require having strong internet connection across the university. So where you would be holding the institution, it requires you to have those like basic technological stuff. But I think the problem is even during offline, the issue usually with our tabbing system was that not everyone had online stuff. So like even as late as last year, people were still using paper for tabbing because it's hard to send it from one room to the other. So I think if we were to go hybrid, definitely it'd probably still be in my room using online, because I don't think a lot of the organizations within the Philippines would probably be able to use those resources to use it as a hybrid. I think in terms of the question itself for post-COVID world, definitely I think why Asia, or at least Southeast Asia in my experience, some parts of South Asia are okay with keeping it online is because I think there was an explosion in access for our majors. ABP and UADC have become a lot more accessible to a lot of circuits. Like talking with some friends from South Asia, this is probably one of the best years for South Asia because like there are just so many institutions who probably have not been able to travel. From my experience, obviously I can't represent them perfectly, but there are a lot of discussions online that I got to understand a bit more. I have friends from other parts of the Philippines because the Philippines is an archipelago. So for you to go to one place, you have to go on a boat or you have to go on a plane. So for a lot of the time, not only is it incredibly hard for them to go to a different country, it's also hard for them to find people to train within those smaller provinces. So this was probably one of the first years that they're able to go to an Asian major. So I think it's incredibly, of course, not everyone has good internet, but the prices, because now you don't have to pay for flights as well as everything else, is just a lot more accessible. I think the logistic aspect of organizing tournaments also means that you can have more rooms, and that's something hopefully I'm looking forward to in Korea Worlds, where like the team cap is a lot less, hopefully, because now you're not limited by just having X number of rooms. Therefore, you can accept more people from the global south. So I think that's one pro thing of online debating. Obviously, I'm not yet benefited by like prospective like understanding like what the world would look like if there was a competition of like you're debating here and then you have music festivals as like what happens in New Zealand. But I think definitely that's something that is quite beneficial for the Asian circuit. On the side of people who are competing, on the side of people who are organizing tournaments, I also think I'm not super sure if this applies to other developing circuits, but in our circuit, as I flagged earlier, it's very few IVs. So the ones who get IVs often are the ones who are like really large institutions like Ateneo or ourselves or University of the Philippines, Los Baños. And I think now that you don't have as much costs, I've seen a lot more tournaments with a lot more participants or tournaments from people who don't come from large institutions. So I think on the other hand, I think in the Philippines, what helps is that you have more people actually be able to know debating because they can also organize a lot of these tournaments for themselves. And I think the good part as well of online debating, which I am really hopeful continues on, is there are a lot more lectures for some reason. I think it's just we are able to have lectures even before, but now that everything is online, I think we kind of just realize, oh, it's a thing that we can actually use. So I think that really help a lot, not just for my society, but I know for other people as well. So I think hopefully that's something that can be used. On a very minor note, what I really enjoy is to be able to relate to the memes on shit posting and pop posting now, especially because everyone is just one circuit. So it's like fun. Oh, okay. So that's the thing that happened on serious posting. That's the thing that happened on shit posting. Oh, now I can relate to it. I can understand. So that's also quite fun because of a community aspect of it. Yeah.
Awesome, thanks for that. And I sort of want to reflect on three things you said. I think one, yeah, with hybrid, there's definitely like, it's definitely not super straightforward. Like there are logistics that you have to sort out, including making sure that like, you know, where you're hosting it from has internet and those sorts of things. Secondly, I think my impression is that people who have only known online probably don't have the same kind of like rose tinted glasses perspective of in person. So it's probably like, you know, you don't have that kind of in-person memory. So I guess it makes sense that people probably don't feel as strongly. But I do think, yeah, everything you've said is definitely right on the money in terms of maintaining at least a significant portion of those opportunities and continuing access for circuits that would otherwise find that access challenging. So I guess the last question I have, and this is just a bit of a shorter one, so I guess just add any input that you have, is basically just like cross-societal and cross-circuit relationships. Have your societies done, I mean, Jack, you mentioned something about like some partner, what was it, society? And I also know, Daniel, at Auckland, my understanding is that there was attempts to create some sort of, and I could be wrong here, so do correct me, some sort of like, we'll give you a CA, you give us a CA, some sort of cross CA kind of partnership. I'm curious to know where that got. I might start with you, Daniel, if that's okay. Was that a thing? Did that happen? And is there anything else that Auckland was like, and Grace as well, if you have any reflections trying to do in that space?
you froze for a bit there.
Oh,
Can you
sorry.
finish your?
Oh,
Can you
sorry.
give your POI again?
I'm back. Yeah, I was wondering if it was me. Yeah, just cross circuit, cross club, CA program. Did something come of that? Am I making shit up, or do you know what I'm talking about here?
Oh, so yeah. So I think in general there are like concentric circles to the way I think Auckland operates, because obviously online has allowed us to deepen our relationship with other New Zealand institutions, and the chat about the islands was very relatable. Otago, where Grace used to go to university, was on the South Island of New Zealand, and now we're up at the top of the North Island. And if you literally just Google how large New Zealand is, people think it is way smaller than it is. It would stretch from like Spain up to the top of the Netherlands. It's larger than the entire British Isles. Like, it is a large country. So being able to jump between islands virtually, and jump even across continents virtually, is quite fantastic. I'm part of a WhatsApp group with a group of debaters in South Africa, and every once in a while we'll have a debate together. So I think having those types of opportunities is really wonderful. But then you've also got to put in some formal structures in place. So what we were doing is not CA swapping. And I know that institutions for ages have been trying to build those types of relationships. We've been particularly looking at developing the next generation of AdCore members in tandem with other like societies. So what we tried to do with Aotearoa Open, and it just didn't quite pull off because it was a little bit last minute, but we hope to be able to do it in the future, is being able to send some of our basically people who we think will be on AdCores shortly in the future to be assistant chief adjudicators at different tournaments, and having people come to us to be assistant chief adjudicators at Auckland. And so we had chats with Sydney about Sydney Mini. We had chats with Apneo about their online opens as well. So what we'd hope to build into the future is having a way that basically young people from Auckland are able to mix and mingle with other young people from societies, and basically build exchanges in the way that you teach and develop young adjudicators. Is there anything else in particular? I think just being able to hold on to friendships that you make overseas. So I think I've obviously gone to a lot of in-person tournaments, but I've become incredibly close to a lot of my overseas friends from being able to see them at different tournaments. So just encouraging people to make friends when they have the opportunity to. And I think actually being online hasn't hindered my ability to make friends. I have friends from Australs last year who I think are as good as the friends that I've made at previous Australs, even though that was in person. Just need to kind of like get over the fact that they're over a screen and try and build those connections. And it is going to be extremely poignant and meaningful when I get to come and judge some tournament in the far distant time and get to meet some of these people in person, which will be lots of fun.
I'm very bad at making friends at tournaments because I'm deeply competitive and then I win debates, not make friends. No, I'm kidding. What I really like about across continents, I really like the Facebook groups like pop posting and serious posting. I think it's really nice to feel like a part of an international community, and also just to see the names of people from other circuits and kind of get to recognize people. And I think they'll make it much cooler to go to in-person tournaments and then come against a team and be like, oh my gosh, I don't know you, but I've seen your name. I'm kind of like, I know your circuit. I've seen your memes.
Tab stalking.
I think that, yeah, well, I think that will make it a little bit nicer. You have sort of a sense of who people in the community are before you potentially encounter them at international tournaments. My big wish is that going forward, we lose a little bit of the like weird irony, like shame about debating stuff. I think it's really sad when we like are on pop posting, like, oh my God, I'm so ashamed to do debating. Like,
Debating's awesome.
Someone help me quit debating. I think debating is amazing. In general, I find it to be a community of, you know, curious, kind, thoughtful people who are there to share ideas. Often so many like amazing friendships come out of it. Really, really good times. I hope that we can be proud of the community that we collectively build every day.
Yeah.
Along these Facebook groups and in-person tournaments once COVID is over.
And it's actually really wonderful when debaters fall in love with each other. So let's keep up the community mingling on those pages.
No, I think the latest bunch of debaters posting has got a. I mean, it's sure interesting, isn't it? I mean, I think my lasting legacy in debating will just be pop posting. So, but you know, can't argue with that. But no, thanks for that. That's I think very insightful. Jack just had to answer someone at their door, so I might go to B next. Does your society have any formal relations with other societies, or is it just a very tightly connected kind of circuit? And I guess any final reflections you have as well.
Yeah. So I think one thing that helps is our circuit used to be quite exclusive. So like it used to be very centric to the capital. And now in our own Discord server, like rank one in the Discord server, because you get ranks or something when you have bots is there. It's like someone from a whole other region from ours because they always love to cross train with us. So I think that's one of the relationships that we have now online. The borders are a lot softer, so it's easier to talk with them. We also just get to hang out together. Like we have a friend from Ateneo who likes to joke around and pretend that they're applying for our organization. So I think we have more opportunities to joke around and just socialize with them. Since like as they pointed out, like it's quite hard to drive all the way here or to fly all the way here. So I think that's a fun thing. Like you're more likely to be a nicer circuit, more inclusive circuit. I think one thing that's also helpful are the SPAR groups. Like I know there's NA SPAR, there's also the European SPAR group, and I'm sure there are also smaller SPAR groups. And I think there has been like Philippine Circuit SPAR group that has been pretty helpful as well. And from what I recall, there are some institutions as well who don't have coaches, who don't have very strong alumni, or who just establish their institutions during the online like phase. So I think one of the things that's pretty cool as well is the debate education is also shared more across different people, and I'm hoping that that's something that can be carried over even after post COVID. Outside of training, of course, the fun thing is we get to make more friends with people. Actually, like the way that we make friends is like when people ask us to fill up feedback forms for them, and then we start asking them, hey, you think you're a pretty good judge, do you wanna somehow train with us? Like, do you want to judge some of our rounds or something? And then that's how we got to meet some of our friends. And I think I'm really hoping that's also still something that can be carried over, like having people judge rounds, like being able to get people to swing in rooms, having more spars. I think that's the most effective way, outside of course, building cultures, to be able to make friends outside of the Philippines or outside of different circuits. And yeah, yeah, in the chat, you can see like, it's great to have people as well to like break what our norm of debating is, because we can like understand how debating happens outside of our own circuit. So I think that's really cool, and I think hopefully that's something that can be retained even after, like along with the other culture stuff like having Facebook groups, etc.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that. I think that's a good final reflection as well. And lastly, Jack, I guess, touching on some of the kind of cross-societal relations you spoke of earlier, but also if you have any final reflections on societal culture and what we can be doing.
Yeah, no, like we do cross training with another institution. I think that's largely because the Irish circuit was kind of getting smaller, even pre-COVID. I think COVID kind of scalped it in a lot of ways, and just like made it difficult for people to want to get involved. And like is in, like for example, Trinity has been the only institution in Ireland to have run a competition since last April, for context. But UCD are running 2 competitions in like 2 weeks' time, which is good, and obviously is showing that some societies are also getting back on their feet, etc. And I think it is important, especially if you're a bigger society, to reach out to smaller societies or societies that are kind of declining, just to try to get them involved in your training as best you can. Obviously, that's not feasible for everyone. Limited resources. Only you could maybe have like a limited number of trainers, but I think it's important that people be cognizant of the fact that they can often include people and would largely benefit them, but also the circuit. And I think that's an important thing that people should identify. And yeah, they are my final thoughts.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Well, that kind of concludes the formal part of this discussion, and I really appreciate everyone's time today. Does anyone in the audience have any questions for any of the panel, more generally or specifically to anyone that has spoken? I'll give you a few minutes. Feel free to unmute. Yeah, do you want to unmute, or you can say it in the chat and I can read it out, whatever works for you.
No, I will talk because I like annoying people with my voice. Anyway, hi Daniel. It's been long. Anyway, my question was, I think, specifically to someone who has like this cross-training thing. although it might be loosely applicable to anyone because I've done it with like UPDS specifically. My question is, my society, because we're only a law school, which obviously means that there are other public speaking activities that people heavily focus on, doesn't really have a lot of intake. So we often have just enough people to hold sessions, but very rarely enough people to have debates. But at the same time, it's quite intimidating for us to like just go to our novices and say, hey, you should be the only one debating with a room full of foreign people in like, let's say a SPA group. So my question is probably, how do you make that balance between cross-training in terms of making sure that your juniors don't feel left out, but also reaching out to societies and actually asking them if they'd be willing to like cross-train with your novices or with your juniors to make sure that there still is a society that exists?
I do think it's very difficult, for example, if it's just one novice, but where it's like two, for example, I think it's okay to reach out and maybe get those two people from the same institution to talk together, like speak together in a drill or something for the first 1 or 2 training sessions. And given the overarching thing of people like socializing, etc., then in theory that should hopefully mean that the stressful part of like debating is done with someone you feel comfortable with, and then the social aspect would hopefully be welcoming and comforting enough that those people would then feel totally fine with integrating. But that would be my observation. I have no like literal experience with it, but that's what comes to mind.
I think well, it's not super applicable to us because in the Philippines, law is kind of a postgrad degree. So like the mood society is different from the debate society. But from my interaction with my friend there in law school, they were always saying that people in mood were always looking for other things to enjoy because supposedly I wouldn't know. Again, I'm just an undergrad, I don't super know it. I'm sure other people can explain a bit more, but they were saying that people were always looking for more opportunities to explore fun things like philosophical motions or like really random motions about like non-renewable like non-renewable energy resources, etc., that oftentimes aren't covered by law motion. So maybe in the first part, maybe that's something that you guys can use in terms of marketing. But for the specific question in terms of novices, I do agree with Jack. Maybe if it's like 2 novices, I think there's a way for you to help them out. But if it's just really 1 novice and it's like scary to place them in a spar group, maybe it might be fun to do a program with them if you have a more experienced member of your organization. Or I think as well, if they're incredibly scared, I think what helps is just the assurance that like after the round, the world will not put into chaos and just fall. Like I think that's what I often feel when I was a nob, because I was scared that if I give a bad speech, like I'm gonna faint or something. So I think being able to process the round with them and being able to like maybe you can try to observe their prep or something, try to give them comments, try to assure that you'll be speaking with them, or just do like public speaking exercises that get them used to speaking more before they jump into the round, might be helpful for people who are a bit too scared of debating but don't have the resources to have a partner that to constantly train with and to get over the hurdle with.
Yeah, just to echo what Bea was saying there, have you considered telling people that mooting is in fact incredibly boring? As someone who has finally completed my law degree, I think what you really want to hammer is that the skills that are taught to people by mooting are very different to the skills that are taught by debating, as well as the fact that obviously debating is incredibly fun. Talk to people about the fact that when they are on the spot, having to tell XYZ person who employs them what the answer to a difficult legal problem is, that's very different to mooting. You can't go away and research it. You need on your feet thinking skills. That's the type of thing that debating gives you. But moving more towards your actual question, my favorite thing to do is pro-am rooms. Literally just have, if you have a bunch of novices and a bunch of senior people, tell another group to bring their novices and then just set up different pro-am rooms. And I think general best practice, I think for all pros, is essentially what you should do is swap AMs for feedback, because what that does is it then allows them to meet other older people in like a chill, calm scenario where they can just have a chat about debating while you're having a chat with their AM. And it's also a really good way for you to start building those connections going forward, and also like introduce your people to new forms of feedback, new ways of thinking. So if you debate with them, so they have a pro that they trust, that's dependable, that they don't get freaked out about it because all the other rooms are pro-am as well, that's the foundation from which they can then jump when they're getting feedback, and then hopefully make some new friends and learn some new stuff. So you don't need to choose between having cross-training rooms that are high level and novice rooms. Really lean heavily on the pro-am stuff because it's a lot of fun. Any thoughts? No, all good.
I think those are some very good responses to that question. So thank you for that. Does anyone else have any questions for the panel? Awesome. I think that's it. But all right. Thank you very much, everyone here, for your time. It is much appreciated. I think that was a very useful session. And yeah, lots of good insights and good takeaways that I think we can take going forward. So